To you.
Please go ahead, sir, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to talk about the sustainability of the organic farming. I think two of the speakers mentioned about it partially. Can I go to the next slide, please? Yeah, this is the outline of the presentation, looking at the global scenario, history of agriculture as such, looking at the Vrikshayurveda written by Surapala about 1000 years ago. What is the context for today's discussion? Looking at the pros and cons of green revolution and looking at what is organic agriculture and how it came about. Majorly, we will be looking at the concept of soil as a bank of plant nutrients, which is the crux of the sustainability of organic farming that I am talking about. And then I make some conclusions and way forward for the future. Next slide, please. This is the global scenario. World population hitting at 9 billion by 2050. More than 1 billion people will be hungry and poor. More than 85% of the smallholder farmers in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa are the ones who have to feed their countries. And we need to increase the food production by about 70 to 100%. How is it possible? Next slide, please. So with all this, we also have the climate change that is going to affect the sustainability of agriculture. Except the Tibetan Plateau in Asia, all other regions are going to be either moderately or highly vulnerable for climate change. So this is something that we need to keep in our heads. Next one, please. So I put this just to indicate that the total potential arable land on Earth is about 3 billion hectares. And if you see in this slide, by about 2050, we are going to hit the ceiling where it is going to be impossible to have more land for cultivation, which means we need to do more with less land or available land. Next slide, please. So if you look at the history of organic agriculture, agriculture itself originated about 7,500 to 6,500 BCE. From the West Asia, it moved towards China and India via Harappan and Vedic civilizations. And at that point in time, all agriculture was organic farming, but which got lost along the way as we entered what we call the Industrial Revolution era. The population pressure, increased frequency of famines, forced people to look at alternatives, including chemical fertilizers and pesticides, to increase food production. So the revival of organic agriculture began in the early 20th century in Europe and the United States, and then much later in other countries. Next one, please. So if you go through the history again, in the olden days, with enough land, sufficient food was produced to feed the population. This was before the industrialization in the 19th century. At that time, soils were fertile. There was no need for inorganic fertilizer, that is the synthetic fertilizers. Pests and diseases were controlled by indigenous methods without using chemical insecticides or fungicides. The agriculture scenario has changed tremendously over the last century. Cultivable land per capita is getting lesser, especially in Asia, about 0.6 hectares per capita in India, which was in 2018. Soils are also undergoing considerable erosion and depletion. New species of pests and diseases and weeds are emerging. Next one, please. I mentioned about the Riksha Ayurveda by Surapala, which was written around 1000 years ago. This is one of the ancient Sanskrit treatises which deals with the art and science of managing horticulture and other agriculturally important crops. Although Riksha Ayurveda deals mostly on appropriate husbandry practices for horticultural species, its principles are equally applicable to the field crops. So there are only two major principles in Riksha Ayurveda. Number one, appropriate management of soil, water, and nutrients, and mark the next few words, with love and care. It's more important. This is what the farmer should do. And then number two is proper control of weeds and plant disorders. That's what they called in those days, whether it be physiological anomalies, diseases, or pests. Next one, please. So when we look at the context of discussion, we need to discuss whether organic farming alone in its current form will be able to feed the growing population in the coming generation. Whether when Surapala wrote Riksha Ayurveda, he spent time and effort in deductive analysis of research to develop the necessary tools and technologies to better manage the plants and trees to enhance productivity over time. Riksha Ayurveda also established what we call a benchmark for future research, although the technologies of those days may not be fully relevant and sufficient to meet the demands of the present day agriculture. So therefore, what we are looking at is a balanced approach by the national and international agriculture scientists to meet the challenge of the increasing crop productivity per unit of land and per unit of water, but also maintain and preserve the natural resource base and feed the growing population. Next slide, please. So what we need to look at is the location specificity of agronomic or crop husbandry practices, which was known even during Surapala's time, and even the current agronomists are also grappling with the location specificity of agronomic practices. Essential that it is very essential we critically assess and understand the reasons that were followed at that stage in Surapala's time, and then we need to fine-tune those crop husbandry practices with modern science-based technologies to suit the existing situations of the current day agriculture. There are excellent possibilities that exist for amalgamation of both traditional practices, including from Riksha Ayurveda, and also modern crop management practices. We should be able to harness the synergies of integrating the valuable ancient knowledge and then the wisdom that we have derived from the modern science-based technologies to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Next, please. So I will quickly go through this, the Green Revolution, the pros and cons. Although the Green Revolutions improved food security in many countries, including India, it also had negative environmental impacts and then yields plateauing over time. It also led to deterioration of soil health, depletion of groundwater, pollution in lakes and rivers, and also increased the greenhouse gas emissions. Loss of crop diversification, for example, in the Indo-Gangetic plain, growing only rice and wheat and not any other crop. Therefore, contemporary agriculture faces the challenge of developing and mainstreaming what we call sustainable agriculture, which I will explain a bit later. And there is a continuing need to increase food production, ensuring that environmental impacts are positive, not negative. What farmers need are agricultural practices that are location specific and context specific, but not generic packages that can lead to further deterioration of the farming systems. Next slide, please. So, looking at what is really organic agriculture or organic farming, I think people should understand that most agriculture practiced by the smallholder farmers with no external inputs is actually organic farming by default. So many farmers in India, in sub-Saharan Africa, and many other developing countries are actually doing organic farming by default. Organic agriculture relies on farmland manure, compost, green manuring, etc. for adding nutrients to the soil, and then use biological control to manage pests and diseases. It is also based on minimal use of off-farm inputs for management practices. It also avoids chemical fertilizers, herbicides, fungicides, pesticides, and other chemicals. But what we need to understand is organic agriculture is suitable only for some farmers in some agroecologies and in some niches where it can be practiced profitably and sustainably. Next one, please. Look at this West African land where farmers are trying to grow a crop. What can you grow in this barren soil if you don't put some amount of fertilizer or nutrients, whatever form it is, whether it is farmyard manure or fertilizer, whatever it is? You need to put some inputs if the farmer has to get a crop out of this barren land. Next one, please. There are several advantages of organic farming. I'm not going to go through all of them. It involves multiple cropping, thus crop diversity is enhanced, provides insurance against risks, provides diversified food baskets to the farmer's family, both like local varieties and land races enhance varietal diversity. It also improves sustaining soil health and fertility because addition of organic matter makes the rhizosphere rich in microbial activity and thus helps in sustained release of nutrients and managing soil-borne pests. Next, please. There are also disadvantages of organic farming. Major is the low crop productivity because yield per hectare is low compared to the traditional or commercial agriculture. If you look at the profitability, it's also less because organic agriculture yields are about 80% of modern agriculture in the developed countries and only up to about 60% in developing countries. Therefore, price premiums, that means when you go to the market, only if the organic products get a higher price, then it becomes profitable. But if there are no high premiums, then it is not profitable at all because the yields are low. Organic agriculture is both labor as well as knowledge intensive system. Although it requires less energy, it needs more land because yields are less, so you need to cultivate more land. Many countries actually in the West subsidize farmers who practice organic agriculture. However, if the subsidies are stopped, then the profits also disappear and the farmers will not be able to have profitable organic farming. Next one, please. So the question many people are asking is organic agriculture a panacea? Is it a cure for all the ills of modern agriculture? I would say no. Why? Because there are reasons why organic agriculture alone, in its present form, mind you, I have put that in italics, in its present form, will not be able to feed the global population sustainably. It is suitable for some farmers in some agroecologies and some niches where it can be practiced profitably and sustainably. We need to avoid blanket recommendations that everybody should go organic. So that is not the case. Next one, please. So if you synthesize the organic farming practices, what we find is most certified organic agriculture is in the developed countries, but very limited in most of the developing countries. Organic agriculture is feasible in countries where cultivable land is plenty, soils are fertile, farmers can follow recommended fallows. That means don't grow the crop year after year or season after season. Fallow the land for any season or 2 seasons or 2 years or 3 years, and then go back. Then soil will recoup and will be able to give you better yield. Much of the organic farming that is globally practiced is in areas where soils are highly fertile and soil organic content, carbon content is very high. Next one, please. So coming to the next point in synthesis of practices, I say organic farming is feasible and practical in perennial horticulture crops, such as fruit orchards, be it apple, peach, orange, etc., and also in plantation crops, coffee, tea, rubber, cocoa, coconut, that are commercial crops and the profits are high. Farmers in areas with fertile soils, supported by good and reliable rainfall, are able to practice organic agriculture even for annual crops such as staple food grains and pulses. But as I said, it needs fertile soils, good and reliable rainfall. However, farmers in arid and semi-arid regions, which are characterized by degraded soils and low and erratic rainfall, they either cannot afford or risk applying external inputs because of the low input and subsistence farming that is organic by default that the smallholder farmers follow. Next slide, please. So this is not my summary. This is a summary that was published in the Hindu newspaper in 2016 by one Raghu Makapati. He says organic farming promises a lot, but having worked with so many farmers, I know that the realities on the ground present a stark picture to this utopian picture. Organic farming is not economically viable option for smallholder farmers who make 80% of the farmers in India. Pushing these methods on such farmers can actually do much more harm than good. Recent examples are organic agriculture in Sikkim, Sri Lanka taking a U-turn of organic farming, and there are many other examples. Next slide, please. So I mentioned about the concept of organic agriculture being wholly dependent on looking at soil as a bank of plant nutrients. Organic agriculture requires, as I said, good soil fertility, organic form, soil organic carbon, essential macro and micronutrients, and also appropriate soil structure and with adequate soil moisture. Most of the dryland areas have degraded soils, low soil fertility, and high soil, air and soil temperatures coupled with low and erratic rainfall. Crop yields are low. Farmers also harvest the crop residue. They don't put it back into the soil because they have to feed their cattle. Therefore, soil organic matter is low and it also degrades very fast because of the high temperatures. A study conducted at the University of Western Australia said that it is not feasible to maintain organic matter in the soils with less than 600 millimeter rainfall and daily average temperatures of more than 15 degrees Celsius. So, which clearly indicates in most of the tropical areas, this is going to be the case. Next slide, please. This is a table which shows the content of major nutrients in the manures and fertilizers. As you can see here, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash in farmland manure, cattle manure, sheep manure, chicken manure, it varies from 0.5 to 1.5 for nitrogen, for phosphorus P2O5, 0.4 to 0.8. Potash, it varies from 0.5 to 0.9. Whereas in urea, it is nitrogen is 45 to 46, superphosphate has 16 to 22, phosphorus, and then in potassium sulfate, 50 to 53% of potassium. Next one, please. So what we are looking at is that organic farming needs to be pragmatic as well as holistic. If you look at the amount of nutrients that are removed from soil, for example, 1 ton of maize crop removes 160 kg of nitrogen, 66 kg of P2O5, and 48 kilograms of potash. Once it removes, then all these nutrients have to be replenished or put back to the soil after every harvest to maintain what we call a positive balance of nutrients in the soil. However, organic manures, be it cattle manure, horse, sheep, or farmland manure, contain only about 0.5 to 0.7% nitrogen and this much of P2O5 and 0.5 K2O. So based on about 0.5% nitrogen in manures, farmers need to add about 9.2 tons of organic manure to get the equivalent of about 100 kg urea containing 46% nitrogen. In whatever the case, farmers need to provide a combination of both organic, and if they cannot put organic manures, then they have to put other fertilizers to ensure improved soil health and sustainability. This is the crux of the whole sustainability of organic farming. Next slide, please. So, smallholder farmers in the developing countries usually practice what I call organic by default. Organic agriculture depends on price premiums. Some people mentioned earlier about conservation agriculture or resource conservation technologies. These are very much needed in terms of minimum or no tillage, having permanent soil cover, using crop residues or mulching, crop rotations and other associations. And then this conservation agriculture will also need, because you are not going to do tillage, if you have to sow the seed, then it will need machinery to put the seed into the soil, and also maybe use of non-persistent herbicides for weed control, because since you are not sowing, not growing, weeds are likely to be of a problem. Next slide, please. So I say these are the sustainable agricultural practices, SAP. We need to have that pragmatic approach of nutrient management to ensure the nutrient requirements of the crops to achieve optimum yields. We need to combine resource conserving technologies and the principles of conservation agriculture and modern agriculture in a balanced way, looking at zero or minimum tillage, depending on the soil and climatic conditions, use of crop residues and organic manure, soil test-based application of nutrients. Very, very important. We have been taught during our agriculture graduation courses that you need to apply nutrients based on soil testing. And that is a principle that will continue throughout. So we need to manage the weeds using safe herbicides as necessary, and also manage pests, maybe using a combination of biological methods, but ensure that the crop is healthy and the farmers do not incur crop loss. Next slide, please. So to conclude, overuse of chemical fertilizers and pesticides had resulted in ecological and environmental problems. Organic agriculture can sustainably feed the world population, but with support from microbials, biofertilizers, biopesticides, and fungicides. We need to develop a basket of technological options for sustainable agriculture practices. And this is important, that amalgamates both the traditional knowledge with modern science-based practices. We cannot separate these. We have to have the synergies of traditional knowledge and modern science-based practices. We need to empower the farmers to choose the appropriate farming practices that are suitable for their farms, their agroecologies, and their economic conditions. We also need to ensure the availability of quality bioproducts, biopesticides, biofungicides, biofertilizers, etc., to the farmers so that they can have organic farming profitable. Next one, please. So the way forward to the future is that it is neither wise nor advisable to follow past agronomic practices that were possibly followed 200, 300, or 500 years back to the current day farming where soils have already been impoverished. We should take a holistic view of soil as a bank of plant nutrients and need to replenish the nutrients taken up by the crop every season. We need to use GIS and geo-referenced soil fertility mapping that can help scientists to recommend appropriate manures, biofertilizers, bio-enriched compost, fertilizers, and fertigation requirements. Disruptive technologies have brought revolution in information technology, and information technology is impacting several other fields, including agriculture. Farming is also undergoing transformation with the advent of precision agriculture, which is aided by cutting-edge technologies such as GIS, GPS, GNSS, and LIDAR, and many other technologies. Therefore, there is a need to harness the synergies of amalgamating the best practices from the traditional knowledge and then the modern science technologies if we have to go for sustainability of agriculture in the future. Thank you. I think this is all that I wanted to make you aware of my thinking. Thanks for your attention.
Especially highlighting the pros and cons of it in relation to the smallholder farmers, which we have majorly in the country. Thank you once again. If we have any question from the audience, 1 or 2 questions.
Sir, I will ask a very quick question. Thing is, according to me, organic farming, the objective is to produce chemical-free food for the human consumption. And we always get confused about two things in during organic farming. One is not application of fertilizers and taking care of the soil, etc. This ultimately dilutes the primary objective of producing chemical-free food. Okay, so I feel that I suggest that during in organic farming we should allow the farmers to use some of the chemicals which ultimately don't get deposited in the parts which human beings are going to consume, like the fruits and the grains. If that is done, because we are organic farming, we are getting confused with the natural farming. Whatever you have explained is natural farming and not the organic farming. Your clarification, sir.
Well, no, you can call them by any name, natural farming or organic farming. What I'm hinting at is you need to maintain that plant nutrient balance in the soil. You need to maintain soil organic carbon. You need to maintain the plant nutrients. So irrespective of from where it comes, whether it comes from organic manure or from others, you need to add those plant nutrients. What we are worried about is pesticides and fungicides which are harmful to the human beings. So we need to avoid. I think in my presentation I mentioned about biopesticide, biofertilizers and many other things. Trying to avoid those, and I also said non-persistent weedicides which do not get into the crop produce. So these are a few principles that we need to think about. That is my submission.
I think Dr. Narayanan has a question.
Thank you, Professor Gowda. I think it was a wonderful exposition of how a balance can be stricken between the concept of what is called organic agriculture and modern agriculture. I think it's a synthesis of both, and that's the integration that I also completely support. And in this context, I would like to suggest that for India, rather than taking standards which are made in Europe or other things, we should develop a new paradigm for organic agriculture. And in that, I don't see why, like Ravichandran mentioned in the morning, why BT cotton, which has got inherent genetic resistance, or the BT, which is used as a microbial spray, is allowed in organic agriculture, but not when it is expressed in the plant. These things can be debated and integrated. So I think one point about the chemical nature, I think if you dissect any organism or anything, it's ultimately it is chemicals, whether it is sodium chloride. But yes, I think one point I want to underline, and which Dr. Gowda actually brought out in his presentation, it is not the use of synthetic fertilizer, but the overuse or abuse which is causing the residues.
Correct.
And that is where we need to focus. And we need to distinguish between use. I hope, Dr. Gowda, you agree with me. We need to develop a new paradigm, some of the points I make.
Correct.